My wife had an affair with our couple's therapist, Robert, someone I trusted to help mend our marriage. Not only did he betray the trust I placed in him, but he also used his position to cultivate an inappropriate relationship with my wife, right under my nose. After the truth came to light, he lost his job at the practice we both attended, fired for serious ethical violations. But that wasn't the end for him. Robert ultimately fled the state, continuing his practice elsewhere as if nothing had happened. I, however, was left with the searing pain of betrayal, enduring deep wounds that wouldn't heal easily. Everything between us, between my wife and me, was forever altered from that day forward. My wife, Layla, 48, and I, Charles, 51, had been married for 28 years. Our marriage had its ups and downs, but overall it was a good one. At least that's how I always felt. We have 5 children, ranging in age from 26 to 15, each bringing their own joys and challenges. Layla had been a stay-at-home mom for 23 years, tending to our family and raising our children. During that time, I always felt proud of her sacrifices. However, in the past 5 years, after our children started growing up, Layla decided to re-enter the workforce. With a burning desire to pursue new goals and find fulfillment in her career, she began to change. She became busier, sometimes spending less time at home, but I supported her decision, believing it would bring her new happiness. I thought, even if our lives changed, we would always weather any storm together, our love and bond after nearly 3 decades unwavering. About 8 years ago, my wife decided to leave the religion we'd both embraced since our marriage. I tried to support her as much as I could, but at the same time, I needed to stay true to myself and the values of my faith. This, however, created a growing distance between us. Layla started resenting me for not leaving the religion alongside her. During a heated argument, she lashed out, "You never listen to me just because I'm a woman." I immediately retorted, "That's not true. I listen to you, but I can't abandon my faith just because of that." She scoffed, her eyes filled with anger. "You only hear what you want to hear, and you never consider my feelings. You're always thinking about yourself." Guilt began to gnaw at me, but I remained resolute. "I understand how you feel, but this faith is a part of my life. I can't abandon it just because you want me to." The argument didn't end there. She continued to complain that I didn't help much with the kids or around the house. I felt the sting of truth in her words. "You've never really been supportive with the kids or housework," she emphasized. I hung my head, sighing, acknowledging in my heart that she was right. I could do better. I should have done better. Those accusations echoed in my mind, and I knew I had failed in that regard. But the struggle between my personal feelings and my faith left me feeling helpless, unsure how to bridge the growing chasm in our relationship. For years, I was mentally exhausted and had been relying on medication for 15 years to manage my life. Layla, however, felt it wasn't enough. "You're always low energy, like there's no spark left in you," she'd often complain, a melancholic look in her eyes. She said my lack of vibrancy was draining her, that she needed a husband who was stronger mentally and physically. I tried to explain, my voice heavy with weariness. "I've been doing everything I can to overcome my struggles, but sometimes I just feel depleted. I don't want this, but the medication can only help so much." She shook her head, sighing in frustration. "You don't understand what it feels like to live with someone who's always tired, like I'm carrying both of us." Beyond those complaints, I believed our marriage was like any other. We had some minor issues, but we were still in a loving relationship. However, it became clear that what I considered minor issues were deeper wounds for her. I didn't realize that seemingly trivial things were the source of her discontent for so long. About 6 years ago, my wife started seeing a therapist, Robert, who was 50 years old. It began as a way to address some personal issues, but soon I was also seeing him individually. Several of our children also saw him, and I have to admit he was really good with them. Though I didn't see him often, I always thought he was a good person. He worked alongside a psychiatrist in their practice, and together they adjusted my medication. This helped me feel much better than before. I shared this with my wife, wanting her to feel my progress. "I really think this therapy is helping me. The medication has been adjusted correctly, and I'm feeling myself come back." She didn't react much, just nodding slightly, as if it wasn't that important to her. Nevertheless, I believed the support of the therapist and the psychiatrist was benefiting our entire family, even though I might not have been aware of some deeper feelings she was harboring. As I started feeling better, I realized I had missed out on a lot in our marriage, particularly in supporting my wife. My mental exhaustion had prevented me from giving her the time and affection she deserved for many years. With a desire to make up for lost time, I decided to rekindle our romance, and the first person I thought of for advice was Robert, the therapist we both trusted. I scheduled an appointment, and during our session I confessed, "Robert, I want to do something to rekindle things with my wife. She's sacrificed so much, and I want to make up for what I've missed. Do you have any advice?" Robert smiled, nodding sympathetically. "That's a wonderful idea. There are a few things you could consider. First, start small but meaningful, like writing her a handwritten letter expressing your gratitude for all she's done. Second, You could arrange a surprise date, choosing a place you both love but haven't been to in a while. It will evoke fond memories between the two of you." I listened, nodding, but still felt uneasy. "Anything else? I mean, is there a way to truly reconnect after all the tension and conflict?" Robert pondered for a moment before saying, "You could try being open and honest with her about how you've been feeling lately. Share your failures and what you want to change. Authenticity and listening from both sides is key. Create space for her to share. And remember, nothing is more powerful than real communication." A sense of relief washed over me. Perhaps I'd finally found a path to mend what was broken. I resolved to start with the small steps Robert suggested and see if they could bring us closer to where we once were. Following Robert's advice, I went home feeling refreshed. I realized I had let things drift for far too long without genuinely trying. That night, after Layla had gone to bed, I decided to start with the smallest step, writing her a handwritten letter, something I'd never done during all our time together. I sat at the table, the pen trembling slightly in my hand, unsure where to begin. After a while, I wrote, "Dear Layla, I know I haven't been the husband you deserve over the past few years. I let myself fall into a state of exhaustion and couldn't give you the attention and affection you needed. But I want you to know that I'm going to try my best to make up for it from now on. I love you more than I've ever said, and I hope we can rediscover the love that was once so strong between us. Thank you for always being there for me, even when I didn't deserve it. I hope you'll join me in navigating this phase and starting a new chapter together." I read the letter over once, then folded it, feeling lighter. Then, I slipped it into her coat pocket, hoping Layla would find it the next day. But this was just the first step. I still needed to think about the perfect place for the surprise date Robert had suggested. I sat in contemplation, sifting through memories of places we'd cherished. The small cafe by the lake where we used to sit for hours talking about life when we were first married popped into my mind. It had been years since we'd returned there, and I realized it could be the ideal place to start anew. Not only would it evoke fond memories, but it would also provide a quiet space for us to truly talk, to face each other as we had in the early days. I smiled faintly, hope filling my heart that this plan would help us gradually close the gap between us. Now, I just needed to wait for Layla to read the letter and hope it would spark something in her. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, determined to start a new day with a different spirit. I went downstairs to make breakfast, something I rarely did. The sound of Sophia 15 and Leonard 17 footsteps followed, both looking at me in surprise, but quickly smiling, as if they understood what was happening. Our 3 older children were already out of the house, busy with their own lives. One was studying for a college degree. Another was married. However, they all knew about my situation with my wife, and occasionally helped me win back her favor. We were at a stage where no words were needed, just a look was enough to understand. When breakfast was ready, Layla woke up and came down the stairs with her coat on. She saw me and the kids bustling around the kitchen, her eyes wide with surprise. "You're up early." I just smiled softly and replied, "I wanted to help you and the kids make breakfast today." Layla sat down at the table, and I noticed she was still holding her coat, but she hadn't seemed to notice the handwritten letter I'd slipped in her pocket the night before. We started eating breakfast, and I couldn't take my eyes off her. I hoped she would soon discover the special something in her coat. Layla was confused by my gaze. "Is something on my face?" she asked, reaching up to check her face. I shook my head, smiling gently. "Nothing at all. You look beautiful." Then I returned to my food, a feeling of anticipation creeping into my heart. I hoped she would find the letter before she left for work. After breakfast, Layla stood up, quickly put on her coat, and said, "I have to go to work. See you and the kids tonight." A wave of mild disappointment washed over me. Had she not read the letter yet? I watched her walk out the door, telling myself she'll find it eventually. It's just a matter of time, but the anticipation and hope still made me uneasy, wondering how Layla would react when she read the letter. That night, Layla returned home after a long day at work. Unlike previous nights, she seemed more cheerful. I sat on the couch, watching TV aimlessly, still wondering if she had read the letter. The front door creaked open, and I heard Layla's soft footsteps approaching. Before I could turn around, she wrapped her arms around me from behind, her cheek resting lightly on my shoulder. "Darling," Layla whispered, her voice soft, "I know things have been difficult lately, but I want you to know that I love you very much. You've always been a wonderful partner to me." I felt the warmth in each of her words. My heart beat faster. A faint smile appeared on my lips as I realized she'd probably read the letter I had slipped in her coat that morning. I turned around, looking into her eyes, feeling a powerful connection, as if the distance between us was gradually fading. "I love you too, Layla," I whispered, then wrapped my arms tightly around her. "Thank you for always being there for me." We sat in silence, in each other's arms, without needing to say anything more. We simply felt a sense of peace, as if after so many storms, our love had a chance to reignite. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but this moment filled me with hope that we would find the harmony we once shared. Not long after we settled on the couch together, Layla spoke softly, "Honey, I'm tired. Let's go to bed, shall we?" I nodded, getting up with her. We walked up the stairs, not saying much, but the feeling between us had changed. When we reached our bedroom, I decided to mention the plan I had been thinking about all day. "Layla," I said, taking off my coat and looking at her, "I think this weekend we could go to the small cafe by the lake where we used to hang out. I remember those days when we'd sit there for hours just talking, reminiscing about everything. I think it could be a wonderful place to start over." Layla smiled, her eyes lighting up as she recalled those old memories. "I remember that place too," she whispered. "It's perfect. Let's go this weekend. I really want to relive those memories with you." Relief and happiness washed over me. We both slipped into bed, pulling the warm blankets over us, and held each other. Layla rested her head against my chest, her arms wrapped around me, and we both savored the closeness we hadn't felt in a long time. This moment didn't need words, just our presence together. "It's getting better, isn't it?" I whispered, my eyes starting to close. "Yes," Layla replied softly, her voice filled with love. "A lot." In each other's arms, we drifted off to sleep, a sense of peace returning, as if the cracks were slowly being mended with each small but meaningful action. The following days passed in a new tranquility, as if the air in the house had been refreshed. Both Layla and I felt a change. The affection between us seemed to be gradually restored, without the underlying tension we'd had before. Sometimes, it was just a gentle touch of hands as we passed each other in the kitchen, or a meaningful look exchanged when the kids were talking, all like a connecting thread between us, making us feel closer. The weekend arrived, the day Layla and I decided to return to the small cafe by the lake, where we had once shared countless sweet memories as young adults. We woke up early that morning, both making an effort to prepare ourselves. We each chose outfits that suited the occasion. Layla wore a light blue sundress, her hair flowing freely. She looked beautiful in a simple way. I chose a favorite shirt, feeling a surge of excitement in my heart. Before leaving the house, we sat down and gave instructions to our two youngest children, Sophia and Leonard. I smiled, jokingly telling them, "Mom and I are going out for a bit. If you're hungry, remember to cook for yourselves. Don't worry, there's fresh food in the fridge." Sophia raised her eyebrow, half joking, half serious. "Dad, we're not kids anymore. I know how to cook." Leonard laughed loudly. "Just don't set the stove on fire, and you'll be fine. Mom and Dad don't worry." Layla looked at our children, smiling, then gently reminded them, "Remember, there's food in the fridge. Don't eat instant noodles all day." We both stepped out of the house, feeling like young couples again, on a date once more. As I closed the car door and started driving, Layla turned to me, her eyes sparkling. "I'm really looking forward to this." I gently squeezed her hand on the gear shift, feeling the warmth of her familiar touch. "Me too. It's been too long since we had time for each other like this." The drive to the small cafe was long, and we chatted about the old days, reminiscing about our youthful memories. Layla told stories about how we used to spend hours just talking, or how we'd make plans for the future that, at the time, we couldn't have imagined. When we reached the cafe, the peaceful and familiar lake scenery evoked countless memories. The small place was just as it had been, with few changes. We chose a table near the window, where we could look directly out at the blue sparkling lake under the soft sunlight. Layla leaned back in her chair, taking my hand on the table, her eyes filled with love. "I didn't think I'd ever feel this way again. It feels like we're back in the early days when we were in love." I smiled, squeezing her hand. "Me too. We've been through a lot, but I believe we can rebuild from small things like this." We sat there, talking, laughing, like lovers on their first date. The feeling between us seemed to be revived, a warmth and love enveloping us. As we left the cafe and strolled around the lake, I put my arm around Layla, and we walked slowly, admiring the surrounding scenery. We didn't need many words, just each other's presence was enough to feel the affection returning. Finally, as dusk began to fall, we got back in the car to head home. We were still immersed in the sweet moments we'd just shared. On the way back, Layla leaned her head against my shoulder, whispering softly, "Thank you for today. It's exactly what I needed." I tilted my head, kissing her forehead lightly. "Thank you too, for always being there for me." That moment felt like a promise that we would continue our journey together, overcoming the challenges we had faced and rebuilding the love we once had. The next morning, I went back to see Robert as planned. This appointment was different from the previous ones because for the first time I felt something truly changing in my relationship. As I entered the therapist's office, I couldn't hide the faint smile on my lips. Robert looked at me, then smiled back. "It seems things are going better, don't they?" I sat down in the chair, nodding slightly. "Yes, it's much more effective than I thought. Last night, we went to that old cafe we used to frequent. Since then, everything seems to have completely changed." Layla, she hugged me, said words of love I hadn't heard from her in a long time. "It feels like we've reconnected after being lost. I never thought a few small actions could make such a big difference." Robert leaned back in his chair, his eyes filled with satisfaction and empathy. I'm glad to hear that. Small but meaningful actions can bring about huge changes that we sometimes can't predict. The important thing is that you've opened up, started again with the simplest things. If you continue like this, you'll both gradually find balance and happiness in your marriage. I sighed with relief, feeling more confident. Thank you, Robert. You've helped me so much. I know the road ahead will still have many challenges, but I'm ready to continue walking with Layla. Robert smiled, his eyes shining with encouragement. You've taken a crucial step. Keep maintaining sincerity and patience. Every relationship needs effort from both sides, and I believe you and Layla can overcome any challenges. Take your time and progress, and everything will gradually get better. My heart felt lighter, and hope filled me. This meeting with Robert not only confirmed that my efforts were headed in the right direction, but it also helped me trust in our future more. As I left, I knew I had found a way to move forward, step by step, on the path to recovering my love for Layla. However, our happiness was short-lived. Recently, I started noticing strange behavior from my wife. It began with late-night phone calls she would take in her home office. Initially, I didn't think much of it. I assumed she was just talking to her sister or her mother, as they often called each other to chat. But what was unusual was the timing of the calls. She never used to have conversations at that hour. One day, Layla walked into the living room where I was sitting. She seemed tense, and I immediately realized something was wrong. She sat down next to me, her eyes glancing out the window before turning back to me. We need to talk, she began, her voice serious. I sat up straight, a sense of unease rising in my chest. What's wrong, honey? She took a deep breath, then said, I think our marriage is in trouble. I don't want a divorce, but I can't keep going like this forever. Her words hit me like a shockwave. I tried to stay calm, but a feeling of pain and fear started to spread through my body. You don't want a divorce, I asked, my voice trembling. What do you want, Layla? She looked at me, her eyes filled with sadness but determination. I'm not sure yet. I just feel like we've lost our connection. I feel lonely, and things between us are not what they used to be. I sat there stunned, feeling like the world around me was spinning. She felt lonely, and I hadn't even noticed. I reached for her hand, squeezing it tight, hoping to find some remaining warmth. I understand, I said, trying not to let fear overpower my voice. Layla, I don't want to lose you. If you feel like our marriage is in trouble, I'm willing to do anything to fix it. We can go to couples counseling. I'm certain that with help, we can overcome this. She was silent, looking down at our intertwined hands. After a while, she nodded slightly. I don't want to lose you either, she whispered. I think counseling might be a good idea. I just need to know that you want this too, that we still have a chance to save it. I sighed with relief, feeling a spark of hope ignite in my heart. I want you to be happy. Layla, if counseling is the way for us to find each other again, I'll do everything I can to make it work. I believe we have time to improve, and I won't give up. She smiled faintly, a weak smile, but enough to let me know that all was not lost. However, doubt and unease still lingered within me. I knew there were things I didn't fully understand, but I also believed that counseling could be a way for us to confront all the difficulties we had been through. After we discussed the possibility of joining couples counseling, I thought things would start getting better, but not long after, Layla's unusual behavior continued. She stayed out late more often and began telling me she was visiting a friend who was having problems. At first, I didn't worry too much. I trusted her, and she often helped out her friends when they needed it. However, as this pattern repeated for several nights in a row, I started to feel a little uneasy. Layla wouldn't come home until midnight or later, which was strange because she was always careful about her sleep schedule, especially when she had to wake up early for work. I couldn't help but wonder, how could she stay up so late and still maintain her work performance? Besides, Layla had never mentioned any of her friends having problems to the extent that they needed her constant support. I asked her about it, but she just replied nonchalantly, "It's personal with my friend. She's going through a rough patch, and I just want to be there for her." Even though she reassured me it was just visiting a friend, my doubts started growing. She was going out too often, and the late nights made me think something wasn't right. I tried to reassure myself, telling myself I was just being overly sensitive and tired because of all the recent difficulties in our relationship. But every night she went out and returned home late, the feeling of unease crept a little deeper into my heart. "Are you sure everything's okay?" I asked one night as Layla was getting ready to leave the house again. She just smiled, gently rubbing my shoulder, and replied, "Don't worry, honey, I'll be fine. Just give me some time with my friend." I nodded, trying to trust her, but as she walked out the door, I couldn't stop wondering if there was something she wasn't telling me. The late night calls, the frequent outings, and the changes in her routine, they all made me more uneasy than ever. We had a family tracking app on our phones, mainly to check on the kids, but it also allowed us to track each other. It was just a secondary feature, and normally, none of us paid too much attention to it. However, one night, when Layla was still out and I started getting worried, I decided to open the app and ask her where she was. I sent her a message, "Are you okay?" "Where are you?" she replied quickly, saying she was at her friend's house, the same friend she'd been mentioning lately. I looked at the app and saw that she was in a residential area. I didn't know the exact location of her friend's house, but the area seemed like a reasonable place for a home, so I assumed that was where her friend lived. A few minutes later, my wife returned home. She seemed normal, even cheerful, and pretended that she had just come back from her friend's place. "Just a rough night for her," she said, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. However, a few nights later, she went out again. This time, it was much later, around 2:00 a.m. I woke up in the middle of the night and realized she wasn't in the house. The feeling of worry came back. I decided to check the tracking app. It was still the same location, the place she had been to many times before. Starting to suspect, I sat up, the light from my phone illuminating my face as I searched for that address on Google. When the first search result appeared on Google, my heart sank. It was the professional website of Robert, the therapist that both Layla and I had trusted. He had an in-home practice, and the address matched the location I had seen Layla go to through the tracking app. A feeling of disbelief washed over me. I didn't want to believe she was meeting Robert at such late hours. I tried to find a logical explanation, trying to convince myself that maybe there was something I didn't understand. But no matter how hard I thought, I couldn't find any reasonable explanation. My hand trembled as I stared at the website, and then I saw his phone number clearly listed. An idea suddenly popped into my head. I decided to log into our phone carrier's account, something I had never done before, and started reviewing my wife's call and text log. As the statistics appeared on the screen, I felt like I was being overwhelmed. Robert's phone number appeared hundreds of times. In fact, the total number exceeded 1,300 calls and texts in just the past 6 weeks. I couldn't believe my eyes. What was most alarming was the timing of most of the calls and texts. The majority occurred late at night, the time she claimed she was helping a friend, but even more calls and texts appeared throughout the day, during her working hours. I sat there numb, a whirlwind of emotions: anger, hurt, disappointment, and fear swirling inside me. This couldn't be true. But all the evidence pointed to a direction I didn't want to face. I felt like I was standing at the edge of an abyss where the dark truth I wasn't ready to accept was lurking just ahead. Stunned and paralyzed, I sat motionless in front of the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Over 1,300 calls and texts in 6 weeks, and they all came from Robert's number. The truth seemed too horrific to accept, but all the evidence pointed to an undeniable direction. I sat there, my eyes unfocused, my mind weighed down by a chaotic mix of emotions: anger, suspicion, and pain. I don't know how long I sat there, but then I heard a car outside the door. It was Layla. She had come home. My heart rate quickened, but I knew I couldn't confront her yet, couldn't question or accuse her when my mind was still in turmoil. I stood up, trying to regulate my breathing, and returned to the bedroom. I wasn't brave enough to face what was coming. Instead, I slipped into bed, pulled the blankets over myself, and pretended to be asleep, even though inside, I felt like I had been knocked to my knees. I lay there, eyes closed, but my ears were tuned to the sound of Layla's footsteps as she entered the house. She walked into the bedroom silently, softly as always, as if nothing out of the ordinary was happening. Layla changed clothes quickly, preparing for a day of work. I heard the closet open and close, the rustling of folding clothes, and her familiar hurried movements. She didn't realize I was still awake. Just a few minutes later, Layla left the room, getting ready for work as if everything was normal. The door closed softly behind her, and I lay there alone in the bedroom, completely overwhelmed by what I had discovered. Everything inside me felt paralyzed. I didn't know what to do next. The next morning, I woke up feeling tired and heavy. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, but I felt like the whole world was enveloped in a dark cloud. For a brief moment, I hoped that what had happened the night before was just a nightmare, that the investigation, the calls, and the texts didn't exist. I longed to open my eyes and have everything back to normal, peaceful, and free of terrifying secrets. But as I sat up in bed, my eyes glancing down at my phone, I knew I couldn't escape the truth. The suspicion still simmered in my heart. I grabbed my phone and, with mounting anxiety, reopened Google and searched for the same address I had looked up the night before. My heart pounded again as the first result appeared: Robert's website. The address matched the place Layla frequently went to at late hours. I was speechless, feeling like all my hope was draining away. There was no doubt anymore. What I discovered last night wasn't a dream, it was the truth. A painful truth I wasn't ready to confront, but now I had no choice. I had to act. I decided to start documenting everything, as a way to control the situation and better understand what was happening. I opened my laptop and started writing down everything: Robert's address, phone number, the call and text log I had reviewed. I noted the unusual times Layla had left the house and the number of times she had gone to that address in recent weeks. Each time I wrote down a detail, I felt like I was unraveling the mystery step by step. but alongside that feeling was the pain of each stab of a knife into my soul. Each page of notes seemed to etch the truth deeper into my mind that I couldn't deny. However, I knew I had to continue. I needed clarity. I needed to confront everything that was happening, no matter how brutal it might be. At this point, I still had my scheduled appointment with Robert. After everything I had discovered, the thought of facing him made my stomach churn. But I knew I had to go, at least to see how he would react, and to keep the facade of our relationship going until I was ready to confront both Layla and him. I entered the therapist's office, and as always, Robert greeted me with a calm and professional demeanor. He smiled, his eyes still reflecting the familiar kindness that once made me feel at ease, but now only made me feel sick. "How are things today?" Robert asked, his voice warm and concerned. "How is the relationship between you and Layla progressing? Last time you said you two had a wonderful night together." I felt my body freeze. He was really trying to be sincere, but I couldn't see him the way I used to. Every word, every gesture from him seemed false and deceitful. I tried to stay calm, trying to suppress the anger that was bubbling inside me. I wanted to throw everything in his face, to expose his facade right then and there. But I knew I wasn't ready. I needed time to prepare, to be sure of everything before I could truly confront him. "I think our relationship is still okay," I replied, my voice trying to stay steady. "We've been talking more, and I've been paying more attention to Layla. That night was really good, but we still have a lot to work on." Robert nodded, his eyes twinkling in a way that now seemed disgusting to me. "That's a good start," he said, acting as if he was truly satisfied with the progress I was describing. "Communication and effort from both sides are key. It's important that you both are committed to improving the relationship." Hearing those words from him, I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat. He was putting on an act in front of me, and I had to play the role of an innocent, clueless patient. But I wouldn't let it show. I kept a calm expression, responding appropriately and conveniently to please him, as if I still trusted him. Meanwhile, inside me, resentment and bitterness were churning more strongly than ever. The conversation continued as usual, Robert not revealing any hint of the shady relationship I suspected between him and Layla. At the end of our session, he stood up, walked closer to me, and said in his usual gentle tone, "You know, I'm moving soon, but if you have any issues, feel free to call me. I'll still be here to help if you need it." Those words sent me deeper into the abyss. I just nodded slightly, hiding the anger that was rising in my heart. I left feeling heavier than ever, but also with a growing determination. His deceit couldn't be hidden forever. I knew that sooner or later I would have to face the truth, and when that time came, both Layla and Robert wouldn't be able to escape. The burden weighed on me day by day, and eventually I couldn't take it anymore. Everything had become too much. A few days later, as we sat down to talk in the living room, I decided I had to get to the bottom of things. "Layla," I began, my voice trembling slightly from the pent-up emotions, "have you been seeing Robert lately?" She looked up, her eyes slightly surprised, but not revealing much. "No," she replied calmly, "I haven't seen him in months." I swallowed hard, the feeling of unease in my heart growing. I needed to push deeper. "Are you sure?" I asked again, sensing the tension in my voice. "Are you certain you haven't seen him recently?" Layla suddenly became irritable. "And no," she yelled, her eyes flashing with annoyance. "I told you no." But I couldn't let her continue to lie. I took a deep breath and said slowly, clearly, "I know you're lying, Layla. I've tracked you to his house." She froze for a moment, but then quickly retorted in a harsh tone, "I don't know what you're talking about. That's not Robert's house anymore." He moved. I stared at her, feeling the anger and hurt rising. "I know he's moved," I said, trying to stay calm. "But it's a coincidence that you just happened to visit that exact address, at those late hours, while he was still there." Layla opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't let her have the chance. I took all the evidence I had gathered, the call history, the address, the late-night sneak messages, and laid it all out on the table in front of her. "This is everything I know," I said, my voice deep and painful. "You can't deny it anymore." Layla looked down at the evidence, and I saw all her confidence melt away. Her shoulders slumped, and tears started streaming down her face. "Yes," she said, her voice choked. "I've seen him. I'm sorry." Her admission felt like a knife plunged straight into my heart. The truth was finally out, but it didn't make the pain any less. As I struggled to remain composed, Layla continued, her eyes red from crying. "Please, don't get Robert into trouble. It was a mistake. But I don't want things to get worse. He's moved. He's not going to be here anymore." I sat there, listening in silence, trying to suppress my overwhelming emotions. "I don't want to cause trouble for anyone," I said slowly, clearly. "But I have to think about everything that has happened. What Robert has done is wrong. Wrong on so many levels." As I spoke, looking into Layla's eyes, a sudden realization struck me, making me feel like I had been knocked down again. The night she came home and enthusiastically hugged me, saying words of love, I thought it was a sign of real change. that she had read the letter I had left in her coat, but now I realized it was all an act. Robert, he was the one who had planned it all for me. He was the one who told Layla how to respond to me, just to keep our relationship from crumbling immediately, and to protect himself. Layla had followed his instructions, had played the part to make me believe she was trying, but the truth was she never really cared about the handwritten letter I had slipped into her coat. I remembered. The letter had been in her coat pocket for a long time. When I found it, it was crumpled and no longer intact, ruined after being washed. Layla had never read it, never really cared about the heartfelt words I had written. It was all a play directed by Robert, and I was just a puppet in their game. Layla nodded, but she still tried to downplay the issue. I don't want a divorce. I don't want to leave. Our daughter is still in high school, and things will get messy if we do it now. I looked at her, a feeling of utter confusion overwhelming me. She didn't want a divorce, not for love, but for practical reasons, like not wanting to move or affect our daughter. I felt more disappointed than ever, but I still didn't know what I should do next. Maybe I needed more time to confront everything that had happened, and to decide the direction of my life after all that was broken. However, after confessing everything, Layla didn't stop there. She took a deep breath, looked straight at me, and said frankly, "Anyway, I feel like our relationship is over. I don't want a divorce, but I think we should have an open marriage. Maybe that will make things easier for both of us." I sat there feeling like everything was crumbling around me. Her words echoed in my head. Unbelievable that the woman sitting across from me was suggesting such a thing. An open marriage, I repeated, my voice choking with pain and confusion. "Layla, do you really think that can solve our problems?" She nodded, her expression unchanged. "I don't want to give up on our family, but we're not connected anymore. If we can be more open, maybe things will be less stressful." I looked into her eyes, feeling like I was being backed into a corner. Everything I had ever known about our relationship, about love and marriage, seemed to be shattering completely. "I need time to think about all of this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, while inside my heart was a whirlwind of mixed emotions. Layla just shrugged, then said indifferently, "Anyway, my relationship with Robert is over. He's moving, and I won't be seeing him anymore after he leaves." Despite Layla saying that her relationship with Robert was over, she continued to go to his place to help him pack and prepare to move to another city. I knew she was trying to cover up the truth, but it only made things clearer. She was still seeing him, even though she said it was all over. The contradiction between Layla's words and actions made me unable to stop doubting. After Robert moved, I hoped everything would end. However, the calls and texts between them continued at a high frequency. She no longer used the excuse of meeting him in person, but their relationship wasn't over. This shocked me deeply. The feeling of betrayal came back, and I realized I couldn't take it anymore. Finally, I decided to seek help from a different counselor, still within the same therapy company where Robert had worked. I needed someone not involved in the situation to help me reframe my emotions and situation. During the counseling sessions, I felt unable to stay silent about the truth anymore. I told the new counselor everything about Layla and Robert's affair, about the things I had discovered. I knew that this information wouldn't just stay there. I didn't know exactly how the process worked, but not long after, Robert was fired from the company. Even though he had moved and was doing remote consultations, the company couldn't ignore the serious ethical violations in his relationship with a patient and client of theirs. Robert's therapy career, as far as I knew, was completely ruined at that point. Robert thought his path as a therapist was over, and it seemed like that was true for the first few months. However, after 6 months of unemployment, I found out he had landed a new job at a consulting firm in another state. Although the feeling that he was still working in the therapy field bothered me, at least he was now far away from my life, and hopefully out of Layla's life as well. Nevertheless, this couldn't erase the emotional wounds I had to bear. The relationship between Layla and me was still far from being healed, and I wasn't sure if we could overcome this pain. Finally, after months of tension and internal struggles, my wife and I decided to legally divorce. Even though we both felt pain over this decision, we realized that our relationship had reached a point of no return. We no longer had the necessary connection to sustain a marriage, and divorce was the only option left. One evening, after discussing it thoroughly, Layla sat opposite me in the living room, her voice calm, but with a hint of sadness. "I think it's best if we go through with the divorce. We'll still live under the same roof until our youngest graduates high school. This will be better for the kids." I nodded, trying to accept reality. "I agree. We'll stay here until things settle down with the kids. We both know we're doing this for them, at least until our youngest is ready to leave the nest." She looked at me, her eyes reflecting weariness but still holding a touch of warmth. "We don't have to hurt each other anymore. We can keep things friendly for the sake of the kids. That's the most important thing now." I smiled faintly, a bitter but genuine smile. "I agree. We've been through a lot, but we can still treat each other with respect. That means something to me, and to the kids." We signed the divorce papers but continued to live together in the old house, partly for the sake of our children and partly because we had become accustomed to each other's presence. Although no longer legally married, we tried to maintain a friendly attitude. Layla and I still occasionally sat down to discuss household matters, how to care for the children. There was no longer any pressure, nor any tension between us like before. During that time, I gradually began to heal the emotional wounds Layla had left. I met Stella, a woman I had met by chance at a gathering with friends. Stella not only understood and listened to me, but she also made me feel valued, something I had lacked for a long time. With patience and sincerity, Stella gradually healed me, helping me to open my heart again and to find faith in love once more. Stella was not only my companion but also a great source of encouragement, always by my side during challenging times. She brought me comfort and peace that I thought I had lost forever. Over time, our relationship grew deeper and stronger. With Stella, I felt like I could be truly myself, loved and respected in the way I had always desired. Even though Layla and I were no longer together, we maintained a friendly relationship for the sake of our children. And now, looking back, I feel grateful for what happened, because it was those pains that helped me find someone truly right for me, Stella, who gave me a new opportunity to love and be loved. Not long after, we celebrated Leonard, my youngest son, with Layla, as he reached his milestone of scoring enough points to enter the college of his dreams. The party was held at home, a lively atmosphere with laughter and excitement from family, friends, and even neighbors. Layla had sent invitations to the neighbors around, and Leonard had invited his closest friends to join the celebration. Leonard, wearing a t-shirt with the logo of the university he had just been accepted to, stood in the middle of the room, a smile on his lips as people congratulated him. Sophia, his 15-year-old sister, stood beside him, a touch of envy in her eyes. Unable to bear it, she muttered to me, her eyes sharp, "Dad, when I get into college, you have to throw a party way bigger than Leonard's, or I won't accept it." I chuckled, rubbing Sophia's head and replying, "Of course, Dad promises to throw the biggest party for you. Just wait until you get into the university you want, and Dad won't spare a single thing." Sophia narrowed her eyes, as if trying to maintain a serious expression, but I could see the excitement clearly on her face. "I'm holding you to your word, Dad. Don't go back on your promise." "Dad never goes back on his word," I smiled back, feeling happiness surge within me as I watched my children so cheerful and accepting of everything in life, including the fact that I had Stella by my side. At this point, our 3 older children also appeared, each bringing a part of their own life, but all gathered together to celebrate Leonard's momentous day. Amanda, our eldest daughter, joked with Leonard, "Remember to study hard, or I'll have to ask my sister for a scholarship to pay your tuition." Leonard laughed loudly, replying casually, "I'll try, don't worry." The party atmosphere became even more cozy and cheerful as neighbors came to celebrate, and Leonard's friends gathered around. Layla, as usual, went around greeting guests, laughing and talking with the neighbors she had known for years. Everyone sent Leonard the best wishes for his future, and I, standing in the middle of the room, felt a strange peace. Although many things had changed in our family, this moment was a testament to the unity and love we still maintained. Stella, my girlfriend, was not absent from the party that day. She had become an important part of my life, and gradually my children had gotten used to her presence. With the children now grown, they understood that my wife and I had made the best decision for both of us. Layla and I had divorced amicably, and the children had accepted that, while also blessing my new relationship with Stella. Stella stood beside me, smiling brightly as she watched Leonard receive congratulations from friends and family. She was always tactful and subtle, never trying to push herself into the center of attention, but her presence always brought me a sense of peace. Leonard's celebration party ended in joy and comfort. After the guests left, the house became quieter. My heart was filled with contentment as I watched my children happy and accepting of everything in life, including the fact that I had Stella by my side. That afternoon, I decided to create a peaceful moment for myself and Stella. We had planned ahead to watch the sunset at a hill on the outskirts of the city, a place where the evening twilight stretched out, the last rays of sunlight gloriously bathing the sky and the earth in gold. It was a quiet place, away from the hustle and bustle of the city, where there was only the sound of the wind and the soft glow of the sunset. We drove away from home, the road stretching out before us, and everything in that moment seemed perfect. Stella and I didn't say much, just sat in the peaceful silence of each other's company, letting ourselves be absorbed in the stillness of a meaningful afternoon. When we arrived at the hill, the sun was slowly setting, golden orange rays stretching across the horizon, illuminating the breathtaking beauty of nature. Stella took my hand, her eyes gazing up at the sky, then turning to me, a gentle smile blooming on her lips. "This is beautiful," Stella whispered, her voice sweet. "It makes me think about all we've been through, and about the future." I turned back to look at her, my eyes filled with gratitude. "Yes, life has changed so much, but I feel lucky to have you here by my side through all of this." We sat down together on a large rock, admiring the sun sinking slowly behind the horizon, its colors adding a magical touch to the setting. The last rays of sunlight fell on Stella's face, illuminating her eyes I had fallen in love with from the first glance. "Charles, I know life will continue to change," Stella said, her eyes still fixed on the sunset. "But I also know that the one thing I'm certain of is that I want to be by your side through all those changes. We've been through difficult journeys, but I believe that, from now on, things will be better." I squeezed her hand tighter, feeling every word she spoke. "Me too, Stella. I used to think everything would never be good again after what happened. But then you came along and made me realize that love is never too late. I've lost a lot, but with you, I've found things that are new and more important. I don't need anything but you, and I want to continue on this path with you." Stella turned, smiled at me, warmth shining in her eyes. "Charles, I love you," she whispered, then gently rested her head on my shoulder. I didn't need to say anything more, just sat there, feeling her warmth and gazing at the fading sun. In that moment, I knew that life had truly changed, and I was no longer afraid of what the future held. With Stella by my side, I felt everything would always be good, because we had found each other amidst the storms of life. As the sun set completely, the sky darkened and stars began to appear. I felt an unusual peace. "We'll always be together," I whispered. Stella nodded, her eyes gleaming in the starlight. "Yes, we'll always be together," she replied, and in my heart, everything became complete.